January 30th, 1945. 1940 hours. Captain Juan Pajota got down on his knees. 1,000 Japanese troops were seen from behind the wooden supports of the Kabu River Bridge in WWII, Philippines, getting ready for evening formation on the far side. He had 200 Filipinos behind him. Along the riverbank, guerrillas were set up to fire. It would be 30 minutes before American Rangers attack an enemy jail camp 800 yards to the south. If those 1,000 Japanese, they crossed this bridge, and every prisoner and guard would die. Japan had been after Potato for 3 years. He knew how they thought, what they used, and how to fight them. He knew how to do the math for what he was going to do. 200 rebels against 1,000 tanks backup trained troops. The odds told us he would lose. The amounts he told them, they would break and run in minutes. The numbers showed that this bridge would be packed with Japanese people. More help arrived before the guards could free a single prisoner. But Pajota had something that the numbers didn't take into account. He set up an explosive-filled bridge with a V-shaped choke point. There are 25 landmines hidden in the approach. He put machine guns in place to make moving fields of fire together. He also had men who had seen the Japanese kill. For 3 years, they will starve and abuse their own people. Men who would give their lives rather than let those forces cross. What happened in the next 45 minutes would turn out to be one of the worst defense battles in the Pacific. War. Pajota and his guerrillas would kill more than 400 people, even though the odds were against them. While they were hurting 21, Japanese soldiers killed themselves. They would destroy tanks, stop efforts to flank, and keep that bridge open so the Rangers can finish their task. And the whole thing would depend on the PJO made a choice 3 days ago that had nothing to do with weapons and everything to do with being able to see what his enemy couldn't. Sergeant James was the first American criminal to be held at Cabanatuan. Baldassari, who was caught at Baton on April 9, 1942. As a supply worker in the 31st Infantry Regiment, Baldassari had done his job. He looked. He saw Japanese bombers destroy his unit's gear, saw his leaders give up, and then started what prisoners do. Called the Bataan Death March, 65 miles long, and took 5 to 10 days. Not any food, water. When men fell, they were bayoneted where they were lying. Men who asked for water were shot. Men who helped their friends were killed by beating. Less than 54,000 of the 76,000 men who started that march made it to the end. Made it to Camp O'Donnell alive. Baldassar made it. He was 170 pounds when he gave up. When he got to O'Donnell, he weighed 112 pounds. After 3 months, he was 94 pounds when he was moved to Cabanatuan. In Cabanatuan, every day prisoners were given 2 meals. Rice that has been mixed with water and sometimes with weevils and sometimes with rotten vegetable bits that couldn't be told apart. Men working hard in humid heat were given food rations to keep them from going hungry. Lieutenant was in charge of the Japanese camp. Shigji Mori, Colonel. Mori thought that giving up was the worst thing that could happen, that guys who gave up didn't deserve any kindness, compassion, or care above and beyond what was needed to get work done. It was clear what he wanted. Use them until they die. Let them die faster if they can't work. By the end of 1942, there were 2,642 deaths in Americans at Cabanatuan. Most of them died of sickness, disagreement, malaria, beriberi, and dengue fever. Infections that could have been treated anywhere but Cabanatu and meant death since there was no medicine for it. The Japanese didn't give any. They told the prisoners they couldn't get any from outside. After seeing guys die in the barracks next to him, he saw them die in the toilets while they were too weak to stand. He saw them die when the group broke apart in the morning on Sunday. And every week the funeral details got more specific. At its peak, the camp had 3 different areas. Camp 1 held people who were sick or hurt. In Camp 2, inmates who were healthier were sent to work specifics. Camp 3 was a temporary place to stay. In 1944, only Camp 1 stayed active. Its population went down because people died and moved to other places. Even though it was dangerous, prisoners formed a secret resistance. Some built secret radios from SCRs, carefully taking them apart and hiding their parts during the Japanese lookovers. Others set up networks of smugglers with Filipino people who took risks execution to get food and drugs. A few prisoners kept careful records, hiding records of Japanese crimes in latrines and hidden boxes led to the conclusion that someone lived long enough to tell what happened. The Filipino underground was very important to prisoners staying alive. With the help of people like Margaret Utinsky and Naomi Flores, ordinary Filipinos sneaked thousands of quinine pills into the camp, which prevented malaria and saved hundreds of lives. Their words got through, between prisoners and their families, showing them that people outside of jail had not forgotten about them. Some pay with their lives when the Japanese government found out what they were doing. The scope of the work tasks varied, and being brutal. The 500-acre camp farm mostly grew food for Japanese people to eat, inmates getting small amounts. When guys work at the Cabanatuan airport, work to fix up and make the airport longer so that Japanese planes could use it. More small touches. They dug foxholes, latrines, and firewood piles. They also made military defenses. Men who were too sick to work had to rations were cut, which led to weakness, which led to hunger, which led to death. Caused death. Since 1942, the Japanese have been sending prisoners to other places to do forced work. A lot of people were taken to Japan, Formosa, Manchuria, and other areas that are controlled. A lot of people died on the way when the Allied submarines or planes attacked Japanese ships bearing prisoners that weren't marked. The Japanese refused to mark prison ships, which led to terrible accidents in which Allied troops killed their own men. More than half of the captives from Cabanatuan were dead by the middle of 1943. The people who were still alive had seen friends die of hunger, disease, and random acts of violence. Men were put to death by Japanese guards for stealing food and talking back, because they were too sick to work. The emotional pain was worse than the physical pain. Some men just no longer trying. The little food they were given stopped being eaten. They stopped getting ready to form. They laid down in their bunks, ready to die. Their name for it was giving up. The doctors at the camp called it terminal despair. The Japanese people said it was fine. As of December 1944, about 5,116 at Cabanatuan, Americans were still living. Most of them were too weak to walk without help. Please help. Many people had tropical sores and gangrene infections that weren't treated. That had been going on for months or years. The youngest person locked up was 20 years old. They were 56 years old. Most of the prisoners were lighter than 90 pounds. The worst part didn't know if anyone cared. Every day in jail, the Japanese told their guards that America had forgotten about them and that their families thought they were dead and that no one would come to save them. Some inmates thought it was true. These people wrote letters that would never be sent. They planned for a time after the war that they would never see. They made up stories about being saved that got more desperate every month. Then on December 14th, 1944, something happened that made their worst fears come true. The killings in Palawan took place on December 14th on Palawan Island, which is 300 miles south of Luzon. In a place like Cabanatuan, 150 American prisoners were kept there. When American troops landed on nearby Muro, Tokyo told the Japanese camp leader what to do. Put the inmates to death. Don't let anyone see. The guards told the prisoners that there would be a practice air raid. They told everyone to dig holes with covers. From the inside, guards poured gasoline into the ditches and put lit torches in there. Men were set on fire and burned alive. Those who tried to get away were hit with a machine gun or a blade. 11 men lived. They jumped into the water, swam to some nearby rocks, where they hid until it got dark. Filipino rebels found them, hid in them, and brought them to American lines. Those who lived told the Army their story. Officers of intelligence. Within 48 hours, word of the massacre got to the offices of the 6th Army. Walter Kruger, the general, I immediately knew what it meant. If the Japanese were carrying out executions, they would kill inmates everywhere on Palawan. There are American prisoners in camps all over the Philippines. Kruger had to save them before the Japanese could follow the same orders. Major Robert Lapam was in charge of Filipino rebel groups near Cabanatuan. Lapam was from Iowa, was 28 years old, spoke Tagalog well, and had been led for 3 years behind Japanese lines. Most of the rural lands around Cabanatuan were run by his guerrillas. They knew all the roads, villages, and places in Japan. On January 26th, Lapam rode 30 meters through Japanese land to get to the offices of the Sixth Army. His horse was worn out. Even though Lapam hadn't slept in 2 days, he had important news that had to be shared right away. He talked to Colonel Horton White, who was in charge of information for the Sixth Army. Spread of Lapam, an outline map on the desk. He showed Cabanatuan and the jail camp that was marked with a red circle. Lapam said there were about 500 American prisoners. Most of them are those who lived through Bataan and Corregidor. The Japanese are told to kill them if the U.S. troops are getting closer. The camp has around 200 guards. One more little more than a mile north of the complex, at Kabu Creek, 1,000 soldiers camped out. There are 5,000 more Japanese in Cabanatuan City, which is 4 miles to the south. The main road in front of the camp is very busy with Japanese groups leaving, tanks, trucks, and whole battalions moving through. Every day. White heard and didn't say anything. When Lapam was done, White asked a question. Can they be saved? He replied, yes, but it has to happen. Right away. As soon as American forces get near, the Japanese will carry out the White called Lieutenant Colonel Henry. They would rather keep prisoners than free them. Mucci, who is in charge of the 6th Ranger Battalion. The Rangers had been practicing for missions like this one. Small operations with units, hit-and-run attacks, and escapes behind enemy lines. It was Mucci 121 men are free. White told him to pick his best group and get ready for a raid 30 miles behind Japanese lines. C Company and F Company were chosen by Mucci. He also asked for special Alamo Scouts. Reconnaissance teams were trained to gather information deep in enemy territory. 2 scout groups from Alamos were given. There are 14 guys on Team Nellis and Team Ransville who are the best reconnaissance experts in the Pacific area. The task meeting took place on January 27th. Mucci laid out the plan. Rangers would sneak through Japanese lines, join up with Filipino rebels, and attack the camp at dusk. Get all of the prisoners out of there and back to the American lines before the Japanese could send more troops. The job had to be done in less than 12 hours. If they stayed any longer, they would be caught in the daytime with 500 barely Japanese divisions coming together from different places and freed prisoners moving around. There were risks, quite amazing. 30 miles behind enemy lines with little or no air assistance. If something went wrong, Kate would not be able to do the surgery. The Rangers would be trapped, outnumbered, and killed. But the other option was to let 500 Americans be put to death. It was easy to make a choice. Mucci stressed 3 conditions that could not be changed. First, a big surprise. If the Japanese knew they were being watched, the prisoners would be put to death before the guards got to the camp. And second, great timing. Every part had to coordinate very well. The guards, the attack teams, and the prisoners. All of these things had to happen at the same time. Escape. Third, there were no prisoners left behind. Either a man comes out or no one comes out. The guards worked hard to get ready. They sanitized their guns, checked the ammunition, looked over maps, and practiced their individual moves in their minds. Parts. Some people wrote letters home knowing that they might not get back. Some prayed. Some people just sat there in silence thinking about what they were going to do. Captain Robert Prince would lead the attack. It was 25 years old and Prince was from Seattle. Not loud and planned out. His men told him to be careful. Police officers who had trained with him called him very careful. It was Mucci who said he was the most tactically sound company leader in the whole battalion. Prince looked at the reports on intelligence. The camp was surrounded by cleared fields that made it impossible for prisoners to flee. Each corner has a guard tower, wire fencing, guard housing, and temporary quarters for Japanese troops who were going through the area. Places where prisoners were kept were in the northwest part of the building. The camp itself wasn't the main trouble. It was Japan's army at Kabu Creek. 1,000 troops with tanks, heavy guns, and trucks. They could get to the camp in minutes if they fought back against the attack. The Rangers would be seen in public with prisoners who were so weak they could hardly walk. Prince needed something to stop him, something that could keep that bridge up long enough for the rescue to be done, something that could hold back 1,000 Japanese soldiers from going across a river. That's when Juan Pajota joined the plans. Pajota had, since January 1942, they have been fighting the Japanese. He was 31 years old. A former Filipino citizen scouts who had been taught at the Philippine Military Academy left. Pota wouldn't go when the Philippines fell. Don't fight. His men went into the mountains and started a secret fight that would last the whole war. In January 1945, Pota was in charge of about 250 guerrillas in the Cabanatuan area. They were farmers, ex-soldiers, students, and other people, ready to fight. They attacked Japanese convoys, cut off supply lines, and saved Americans who had been shot down. Pilots and secret agents for 3 years. Pota got together with Mike and Prince at Balangkaran village on January 29th. Pota brought maps, sketches, and information, reports that his men had put together after months of watching. He knew more about how the camp was set up than the guards did, knew their own base. Of course, Pota was worried. His question was when they were going to attack. Makna said today, January 29th. Pota said no. The road in front of the camp had been jam-packed with Japanese cars all day. Moving north are rows of trucks, tanks, and even whole units. An attack tonight would be found right away. They had to wait until there was less traffic. Pota also said that the 1,000 Japanese at Kabu Creek were ready to fight. His spies had seen more patrols and defense plans being made. They were scared by something. An attack while they were aware would be death. Muchi didn't want to wait. Every day raised the chance that inmates would be put to death. Prince agreed with Pota, though. They needed things to be better. Giving them one more day could mean the difference between success and disaster. The attack was pushed back to January 30 at dark. That gave PJO 24 hours to figure out a problem that couldn't be solved. How do you 200 rebels stop 1,000 trained infantry? Most leaders would have paid attention to arms of war. There should be more explosions, guns, and bullets. However, Pota got it. There's something more important. He knew about psychology. He knew that for 3 years the Japanese had been winning, that they thought smaller forces would run away because they were used to easy wins against weaker opponents. Pota was going to use their trust in him against them. He put himself and his men lined up in a V-shape on the south shore of the Kabu River. The bridge was where things got backed up. Any force trying to cross would have to go through that bridge, putting themselves at risk of a lot of fire from both sides. Pota put machine guns at the very top of the V. These guns could fire non-stop for minutes without getting too hot. They would shoot so many shots that nothing could get through it. 25 bombs were buried near the bridge. Mass charges were a big part of Japanese infantry techniques. Those bombs would set up barriers for the troops that are coming after the first waves. He put charges for tearing down the bridge itself. Charges would not destroy the bridge all the way. That would have been great, but they didn't have enough bombs. They would instead blow a hole big enough that tanks would not be able to cross, and troops would have to go around the damage, which would slow their progress. The most important, Pota put himself and his command group in a place where they could see the whole fight. He had to point the gun, calling out targets and keeping spirit up when his men were dying because they were willing to lose people. There was no way that 200 men could have held off 1,000 without losing any men. In January 28th, the Rangers left Guimber and drove in trucks to the last American base outpost. From there, they would walk through land that was controlled by the Japanese. The trip began at dusk, getting hidden by using darkness. Filipino rebels led them through the back country, staying away from Japanese troops and checkpoints. People in the village had been told to put their chickens in pens and muzzle their dogs so that they wouldn't make noise that could alert the Japanese. Some families briefly left areas near the planned route because being absent was seen as less suspicious than being present. Risk being found out about the big American force that is moving through. The invasion needed complete control over noise. Rangers wrapped gear to keep it from shaking. They used hand signs to talk to each other. They moved one after the other, each man keeping eye contact with the person ahead of him. Japanese truck convoys went by within a few yards of where they stood. They stood still and could barely breathe as enemy forces drove by without noticing. In the morning of January 30th, the Rangers made their last attempt. They moved during the day and crawled through rice cakes and hiding in irrigation ditches whenever Japanese cars came along the road. It was painfully slow to move forward. In 6 hours, they went 800 yards. The Alamo Scouts went ahead. Bill, the Lieutenant Nellis, and Private First Class Rufo Vacular put on straw hats and other clothes to look like Filipino farmers, tools for farming. They went barefoot 300 yards from the camp gates to a grass hut. They could see the whole property from inside the hut. They talked for 2 hours. Vakula looked at it. They kept track of guard posts and shift changes, found the cells for the prisoners in a shed with 4 Japanese tanks inside. They drew everything. When they were done, they crawled back to the ranger post and gave their report. Prince changed his plan because thanks for the new information. If Second Lieutenant John Murphy was in charge of F Company, take out the guard towers and attack the front gate. Prince's C Company would hit the back of the camp and clear out the prisoner homes. Right at 1940 hours, the attack would start. A P-61 Black the Widow night fighter would buzz the primes at camp to keep the guards busy while the Rangers climbed into place. At 1800 hours, Pota and his guerrillas set up camp on the bridge. The Japanese on the other side of the river were finishing up evening practice. Pota could hear their police officers yelling orders. He could see starting fires in the camp. He could smell that something was cooking. 1,000 guys getting ready for a quiet evening. They had no idea that their position would be attacked in 90 minutes. Pota looked at his watch. 1910 hours. 30 minutes until the soldiers came in. His men were all set. With machine guns ready to go, mines are armed and demolitions are ready. Now they had to wait. At 1930 hours and 10 minutes, Pota. They could hear the P-61 coming from the south, the unique sound of 2 booms of the plane engines that went across the rice paddies. The plane flew over the camp with its engine backfiring, perform acrobatics that make all Japanese guards look up. 1940 hours. Pota heard the first gunshots from the camp. F Company had started shooting. The sound was clear. M1919A, 4 machine guns, M1 weapons, and the heavy grenades going off. The attack had already started. Japan's camp was across the river, burst out. Police were yelling. Guys were running for weapons, and trucks were starting up. Pota could see them getting ready to move by planning, lining up, and arranging. They were going to cross the bridge. They would make the camp stronger. Everyone in the jail and every ranger would be killed if Pota didn't stop them. In the morning of 1942, the first Japanese forces arrived at the bridge approach. They were running. It wasn't organized in any way. There was just a mass charge toward the sound of gunshots. Potato stayed put. His men were told to wait to fire until the enemy was close enough to the bridge. 50 Japanese. When Pota gave the order, there were men on the bridge. All of his apes started shooting at the same time. There were machine guns and almost 200 rifles shooting into a small area. The impact was terrible. The area around the bridge turned into a killing zone. Soldiers from Japan fell in clusters. As the people behind them tried to get away, more troops pushed forward. The bridge got crowded with bodies. 1944 hours. Pota set off the bombs under the bridge. The bomb went off. Made a big hole in the building. It wasn't big enough to stop people on foot, but it was big enough that vehicles couldn't get through. A Japanese tank tried to cross. It went down into the hole and blocked the bridge totally. See, more Japanese soldiers were coming at us. Pota could see police trying to get them to follow the rules and form proper attack lines, but they were caught in the crossfire by the V-shaped defense position. Every method was talked about. There was a lot of machine firing along the river. Officers were killed by rifles. The Japanese were losing a lot of people and not getting anywhere. Ground, 1946 hours. Pota saw that Japanese troops were trying to move around him. Right place. As they moved downstream, they tried to cross the river without going over the bridge. Pota knew this would happen. He had put together a backup team and told them to keep an eye on the flanks. They fought the force on the flanks. In just minutes, the attempt to turn was wiped out. Bodies slid downriver in the current. The Japanese did it again. There is another charge of mass at the bridge. This time, they brought a second tank forward. It was the tank's main gun that hit the guerrillas. The round went off near 1-2 of the machine gun nests, killing 2 and hurting 3 more. A ape with a bazooka, which had just been trained by rangers that morning, stood up with the gun. He had never shot it. Combat. The tank was 200 yards away, moving, and some smoke made it hard to see. He aimed, let out a breath, and fired. The bazooka shot hit the front of the tank. Armor and got through it. The tank came to a stop and hatches flew open. The crew left. They were killed by gunfire before they could get to safety. 3 more tanks were destroyed by the same guerrilla, trying to get across. A fighter who had just learned how to use the weapon that morning blew up 4 Japanese tanks. 1950 hours. The Japanese stopped trying to attack. Pota saw them changing how they were set up. They moved back and set up defensive posts on their side of the river. They had suffered a lot of losses, and they tried to cross the bridge with their tanks but failed. The attack was put on hold for now, but Pota knew they would try again, once more. The Japanese infantry philosophy stressed attacking quickly and forcefully. They would get back together and charge again and again, until either the bridge broke or they ran out of men. 1952 early hours, the Japanese third time being charged. This attack was better planned. Smoke was used. Throwing bombs to hide. To stop the guerrillas, they focused their fire on the machine gun posts. They moved forward in proper fire and movement teams, with some shooting and others moving. At that point, things were the most dangerous. The men that worked for Potato were under heavy fire. The casualties were going up. The toads were rivering. Positions with machine guns were constantly being hit. If one of those guns went off, if no one speaks, the whole defense line could fall apart. But the rebels held. They fought because they cared about more than just duty or tactics. A lot of relatives who died at the hands of the Japanese. Many people had seen their country occupied for 3 years. People went hungry and their culture was stifled. There was more to this bridge than just a strategic goal. It was a return. Justice and freedom were all crammed into a few square yards of ground. Would not give up. 1958 hours. Pota saw a red flare go up. From the jail. That was Prince's message. All of the guards had left the area. Prisoners. They were making their way to the meeting point at the Pampanga River. The task was finished. But Pota couldn't take a break yet. The prisoners were still not too far away. If the Japanese forces crossed the bridge right now, they could stop the evacuation. Pota had to keep going for at least 10 more minutes. 2,000 hours. Another charge from Japan. This one was in trouble. Suicidal. They knew the prisoners were getting away. They knew that when help came, it would be too late. This was their last chance to make something good out of the mess. They charged right into the fire from the machine guns. Not a cover, not hiding, just going straight for the bridge. Dozens fell, then dozens more. The machine guns were getting too hot, and the barrels were glowing red from firing nonstop. While they kept firing, guerrillas poured water on them to cool them off. After 202 hours, the charge went out. The Japanese troops who were still alive ran away. It cost them more than half of their army to try to cross that bridge. There were dead or hurt police cops. Their tanks were blown up. Their spirit was broken. 205 hours. Prince shot a second flash of red. That was the sign for Pota to leave. What the prisoners were, that side of the Pampanga River. They were safe. Pota told them what to do. The rebels he had pushed back by teams that were watching over each other's retreats. They moved quickly, by way of planned withdrawal paths. There were a lot of dead Japanese on the bridge behind them. Pota thought more. More than 400 enemies were killed. 21 of his guerrillas had been killed, and about 30 beaten up against 1,000 attackers with armor. His 200 men had held that bridge for 25 minutes and killed more than 15 times as many people as they injured. Pota didn't have time to count the dead or look at the damage, though. His guerrillas had to get to the meeting place and help the people leave, take prisoners and get everyone across the Pampanga before the sun comes up. Forces from Japan were coming together in the area. The rescue would fail if they were caught during the day. The guards had had 30 minutes to attack the camp, free 516 prisoners, and move to the river. Pota had only given them 30 minutes, not 35 or 25, but just 30, because that's what the plan called for. Pota knew that timing was important for this kind of action, more than just guns. Prince's attack at the jail camp had almost gone as planned. It was the P-61 distraction that it worked. Guards from Japan were looking up at the sky when the Rangers started fire. Every guard tower and pillbox was taken out within 15 seconds. F Business blew the lock on the main gate with a .45 caliber pistol and rushed into the property. The Japanese guards went back. They went back to their camp and tried to plan a defense. They never got the chance. Rangers got rid of the barracks, the enemy with grenades and gunfire. Within minutes, the resistance fell apart. The camp was safety. Inside the prisoner barracks, the guys were confused and surprised. Some people thought it was a trick from Japan. Others thought they were seeing things because they had a fever and lack of food. The Rangers had to show the prisoners that the escape was real and that the Americans had. They were finally going home. So come get them. A few inmates cried. Those I laughed so hard I cried. Some people were too weak to do anything. Rangers found men who weighed less than 80 pounds and was barely living and couldn't understand what was going on, taking place. The medical staff quickly decided who could walk and who needed to be carried right away. The packing up showed how much prisoner pain there is. Men got tropical sores that bone is showing. Others had broken bones that hadn't been handled and had healed wrong. Many were blind because they didn't get enough vitamins. Some had lost the ability to talk because they had been alone for so long. The Rangers knew what it was like for American forces to be held captive by the Japanese for 3 years. One person in jail, a colonel who Baton's father had led thousands of men before him. He was 79 pounds and could barely speak. Someone else, a former player, had Rangers thought the legs were so thin that if they were lifted wrong, they would break. They were not the strong young guys who were sent to the Philippines in 1941. These were broken people who had stayed in hell. But then Prince ran into a problem he wasn't fully ready for. The prisoners were in worse shape condition than knowledge had led them to believe. A lot of them couldn't walk. Some people couldn't stand. They were really hungry. For 3 years, and the sudden excitement of rescue was putting people in danger. A lot of prisoners were having heart attacks because they were so shocked and stressed. The prince told his men to carry everyone who not able to walk. If you have to, carry 2 guys for every ranger. No one is left behind. Muchi had told Prince to do that, and he would do it no matter how hard it made the escape. As they moved toward the gate, the Rangers put the prisoners on their backs. A few of the prisoners were lighter than 90 pounds. They were easy for Rangers to carry. Other prisoners were in such bad shape that guards had to make litters out of and cloth and wood. Someone in jail had a heart attack as a guard brought him through the gate and died. He had lived through 3 years of being held captive, through sickness, hunger, and torture, and died 100 feet away from safety. The officer who was carrying him cried out loud but kept going. There were 515 more guys who they had to leave. Everyone who was still alive in the camp had left by 200 hours. Prince lined them up in a column, and guards stood on all sides to keep them safe. The prisoners moved as fast as they could, which wasn't fast enough. More Japanese troops were coming from city of Cabanatuan. They would be caught if they didn't get to the Pampanga River in an hour. Nearby Filipino. The locals had put together a caravan of carabao carts, which are water buffalo-drawn wagons used to move rice. Goods. These carts were set up by Captain Pajota days ago. There should have been 26 carts. When the group got to the river, there were more than 100 of them. People from every nearby barangay had brought their carts, animals, and their kids to help get the prisoners out of the building. The prisoners were put on trucks, put into carts. People who could walk were helped to walk across the river. The evacuation turned into a group effort. Filipino people put their lives at risk too. They helped men they had never met. Men from a place a very long way away, just since it was the right thing to do. By midnight, the whole force had crossed, and the Pampanga. Prince sent word to the commanders of the 6th Army, success with the mission. 516 inmates were freed, and 2 Rangers were killed, and 4 were hurt. 500 to 600 people, 1,000 Japanese people were killed. The message was sent to General Walter Kruger at 1 a.m. on January 31st. Right away, he told a line of American troops to move forward and protect the escape route. By morning, they were safe. People were being held behind American lines. After 3 years, they were free. The Captain James Fisher, the company surgeon, was one of the 2 Rangers killed when he was hit by a Japanese mortar. He died on January 31st and said his last words were about the prisoners. Corporal Roy was hit by friendly fire from a tense guard after the attack was over. 21 Filipino rebels died. At the Kabu River Bridge, against all chances, they held their ground. Their giving up something made the rescue possible. Japan's response was surprise and anger. The top officers didn't understand how a small American force got 30 meters behind their lines. Lines destroyed a camp and got hundreds of prisoners out of there. They thought Filipinos in the area, which was true but not helpful. The harm was done. The fight at the Kabu River Bridge was more worrisome. From Japan, when leaders went over the battlefield again, they saw more than 400 dead bodies, many destroyed tanks, and signs of a well-executed steps taken to defend. The stories from after the action had a hard time describing how the guerrillas had caused such loss of life. According to official Japanese army theory, guerrillas were not very good fighters who would break if attacked for a long time. This engagement showed that wasn't true. The consequences for strategy were big. If Filipino guerrillas could hold out against larger groups of enemies, then Japanese troops could not. Think that future battles will be easy to win. Every road and bridge, it's possible for every village to turn into a fighting zone. That doubt made the Japanese less sure of themselves and made them send more troops to protect the back areas. The front lines need them badly. The rescue was bigger than effects on strategy. 4 more jail camp raids were done by American forces in the next month using the same strategies. Rangers or scouts to attack, and Filipino guerrillas to stop. Positions and local citizens to help with the evacuation. Those raids saved. Over 7,000 people are in jail. To help the inmates go back to the American lines meant getting medical care, eating real food, and taking their time getting better. Many needed to stay in the hospital for months. Some people never fully got better after hot. They got sick in the camps, but they were still living, which was more than any of them had hoped for a week earlier. Medical exams showed that abuse and deliberate starvation were happening. The average prisoner who was freed weighed between 70 to 90 pounds. A lot of people got beriberi, pellagra, scurvy, diarrhea, and various parasitic infections at the same time. Dental exams showed that teeth had been lost to poor diet. X-rays showed breaks that had never been fixed. The actual proof backs war crimes charges. Japanese crimes were described in great detail in prisoner statements. They talked about the Bataan Death March in more detail, exact places where men were bayoneted, and the names of Japanese officers who ordered killings when they happened, and specifics about what happened. The conditions at Cabanatuan were recorded every day. The men worked hard to get through the amounts of food and the random beatings. People who are sick are left to die without medical help. These accounts turned into important evidence in the trials for war crimes that happened after the war. A number of Japanese officers who were based on reports from survivors at Cabanatuan and other facilities, prisoner camps were tried and found guilty. The rescued prisoners kept their word to write down everything, and their records made sure that everyone was held responsible. Families of people who had died in prison could also find out what happened after they were rescued. Survivors bought messages from guys who didn't make it, last words for their wives and kids, a list of the places and ways guys died, for people whose families had telegrams. These personal accounts, which said things like missing in action or presumed dead, gave closure that government records couldn't. The Distinguished Service Cross was given to Mucci and Prince for their guidance. Silver was given to all guards, stars or metal stars. The 14 scouts from the Alamo got Presidential Unit quote marks. On March 3, 1945, General MacArthur gave out medals himself, saying, "No, the release of the POWs at Cabanatuan was the only part of the operation in the Pacific that made me feel truly satisfied." The mission was a huge success. The Filipino rebels got Bronze Stars for their leaders, but not any official awards. Most of the people who took part were recognized, but the U.S. government labeled them as illegals instead of officials. Juan Pajota went on to say that this caused legal problems with benefits and recognition for armed units. He fought until the Philippines were freed in August 1945. After the war, he asked for American citizenship. He was given citizenship as a reward for his service in the raid, but the application was held up for more than 30 years. In 1976, Pajota went to the United States to follow up on his application. He died of a heart attack on December 20th, 1976. While he was at took 3 days for his citizenship to be granted after he turned in the papers. His death is an injustice that shows how Filipino soldiers have been ignored for a long time. It wasn't until 2003 that they were given proper care. The governments of the U.S. and the Philippines set up a joint committee to provide delayed Filipino soldiers who are still alive were honored, and Juan Pota's family was among those honored at a ceremony in Manila in 2006, where American troops still imprisoned at Cabanatuan. The Cabanatuan raid was successful thanks to careful planning and use of multiple weapons. Planning, Filipino spy networks, civilian support in the area, and a rebel leader who knew that knowing your enemy's mind can help you come up with the best strategies instead of matching their weapons. Potato didn't win that bridge battle because he was stronger. He won because he knew that the Japanese troops would charge over and over, and that their strategy was to doctrine put attacking over keeping the John of Jishan troops together, and that he could use their reliability to his advantage by setting up a killing zone they would keep charging into their force was destroyed. And the raid is studied in military schools as an example of how to plan for secret operations. It was important for the Rangers to train, for the Alamo Scouts to do reconnaissance, and for everyone to carefully coordinate their time. The most strategically creative part was PJO's defensive plan at the bridge, which doesn't get enough attention in most, even though it was the move that stopped the Japanese from coming back. Modern military forces. To learn more about how to make the most of advantages in bad situations, keep studying the interaction. Use terrain to make force multipliers and know the enemy's strategy to guess what they'll do. Their deeds put troops in crossfire zones and keep morale high. Through open lines of contact and a common goal. The raid shows that military. To be successful, people from different groups and countries must work together. The Rangers, Scouts, Guerrillas, and all of the civilians played important parts. Take away any one of them, and the plan probably fails. That dependence on each other is important to stress in a time when individual bravery is often praised. Too much. The operation also showed how useful unconventional troops can be. Filipino guerrillas were not trained as professional troops in the usual sense. They did not have any official military training. They have proper command structures, training, and standard equipment, but they still do it. Were more successful than regular units because they knew the area and kept intelligence up to date. Networks and worked in a way that rigid military groups couldn't match. This was something that American military planners took note of. Learned a lot about how to work with native troops. The raid showed that having allies in the area could help. Even the best American units lacked, knowing how the enemy worked and understanding how civilians lived. Populations, the ability to work without being seen in occupied land and ready to take huge risks to free themselves. These were incorporated into future special operations doctrine. The raid taught us lessons and changed the way we think about missions to rescue prisoners. Before Cabanatuan, it was thought that getting prisoners back from deep behind enemy lines was too dangerous to try during open combat. The successful rescue showed that these kinds of operations could be done with the right planning, information, and help from people in the area. This gave managers the confidence to try to do similar saves in later wars. The psychological effects went beyond the military. An angry American people, tired of years of war and worried about prisoners held by the Japanese, found hope in the story made the front page of newspapers for weeks because of the successful escape. Those who were saved became images of how strong and determined the Americans are. The Filipino guerrillas, on the other hand, were less well known. Those actions, which were seen by everyone, showed how loyal and brave America's friends were in the Pacific. On Juan Pajota and the Kabu River Bridge, because that activity doesn't get enough attention, even though it's the most difficult and important military move of the whole operation, the Rangers are part of the whole story. Every part was important. The attack, the scouts' reconnaissance, the prisoners' survival, and the civilians' help. Shigai Jim Mori, who was in charge of the camp, was tried for war crimes in Yokohama from October to November. 1947. A military court found him guilty and gave him a life term in prison. At hard work. The commission spared his life instead of killing him because they were told to. Came from a higher authority. Colonel Robert Prince lived through the war and came back. In 2008, he died at the age of 89. He never forgot PJOT's part in the raid's success and worked his whole life to make sure Filipino efforts were properly recognized. Sergeant James Baldassar, a supply clerk in the 31st Infantry, who had lived through the death march and 3 years of prison at Cabanatuan, came home to a hero's welcome that he didn't think he earned. He felt guilty about living when so many of his friends and family had died, like many other survivors. He spent years writing letters to the families of men who had died, telling them about their last days and making sure they were remembered. My job was to make sure that the people who died in Cabanatuan would not be forgotten by a country that was ready to move on. The horrors of war. Many freed prisoners had a hard time getting used to normal life. 3 years of being abused and starved left mental scars that 1945 science couldn't help. Some people got what would later be known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Others felt guilty for having survived. They wondered why they had lived when friends had died. It took months or years for their bodies to heal, but it took years for their minds to heal. For many, healing never really happened. Every year, survivors got together for reunions. Together, they found community with people who knew what they had been through. At these events, the inmates told stories, thought about the dead, and thanked the rangers and Filipino guerrillas who had helped them. As time went on and the number of people attending dropped, these meetings became more important for keeping the memories alive. Memory and making sure that the story was told to future generations. Prisoners testified at trials for war crimes, giving important proof against the Japanese officers who were responsible for crimes against humanity. Their detailed accounts, backed up by secret papers and multiple witnesses, led to convictions and punishments. Some survivors thought this process was unfair. Some people found it healing and felt some justice for what had been done, while others found it opened up wounds they had tried to heal. To close, everyone agreed that it was important to hold criminals responsible and write down history. As we remember the Cabanatuan raid 8 after all these years, we should remember it correctly as a joint operation, not as an American mission with Filipino help. Filipino troops were the ones who won the most difficult battle in an operation. They weren't there to rescue anyone, not as helpless victims, but as freedom made possible by men who kept their hope alive for 3 years in prison. Victory through better weapons, but as success won through better planning, bravery, and sacrifice by Americans, Filipinos, and regular people all working together to get something done.